We are learning this DAO part. As part of DAO, when you want to do CRUD operations on database, okay, instead of using plain JDBC, on top of JDBC, string JDBC, API given few classes to make JDBC operations simple and easy. So whereas resource closing operations and executing your SQLs are they made simple here. Instead of having multiple lines of JDBC code, mostly in single line statement we can execute or required DML or DDL operations. Okay. So we went through this example using JDBC template. Okay. So now the same implementation you can do by using named parameter JDBC template also, like JDBC template. In JDBC template here you can give these parameters as a query parameters, and let me implement the same using named parameters. Student DAO named parameter template. So here you can have named parameter JDBC template. Now using this named parameter JDBC template, when you want to run this update method, you need to give string SQL along with your inputs. Which inputs? When you want to insert this values ID here, instead of binding this ID with your SQL, you may put named parameter here, ID, name, email, something like this. And these values you can pass later. You can pass later via a map object here. You can pass a map object. How you can set? Create a map first, map key value, input arguments, new hash map, and you can set input arguments here. Put this is the key that you should use here, and whatever value you are getting from user you need to pass that here. Similarly all these parameters. So you need to create a map with your key and values. This is the key, this is the value. Same way, this is the key and this is the value. And you can pass that map object here. Input arguments map. Earlier, we combined SQL plus data together. Now, we just prepared SQL query here with the keys. And these values we are passing from map. Named parameter. Named parameter. So this is named parameter we call. Yes, this is the syntax. Named parameter. Let me show you this in SQL developer if you have. It will populate. Let me try here. Let's start from tabs or show tables, right? Show tables. No database selected. Show databases. Okay, choose one database. Use test database. And show database. Create a table. What is your table name? Student. Yes. These are MySQL commands. MySQL commands. MySQL database commands. In Oracle, we will use select star from tabs to show the tables. We directly log in into one single schema. In MySQL, we can have multiple schemas directly. Uh, this is MySQL database. Uh, okay. Data type is int in MySQL. In place of varchar 2, we use varchar. So table created. If I try to run this insert query, usually these are the named parameters. It will ask, please enter name, email, IDs. If I use them as a named parameters, it will work in Oracle. Open up Excel, right? In SQL Developer, I can able to use them. Oracle, Oracle's 10G expression. Is it not available? Yeah, see, it is asking you this named parameters to enter. So these are the named parameters, right? When I when I put columns here, it is asking to enter that parameters during runtime. So I can give ID, then name, email, submit. Then it inserted your row. Okay. So similarly, your SQL query when you pass with the named parameters, right? The database will ask for this values ID, name, email. That values I am giving here in the form of map. Okay. This is like prepared statement. It will execute query and it will take these inputs ID, name, email inputs. That inputs we are giving via map object instead of binding them with the direct SQL query. We are passing them separately here. Same thing. That is not created, correct. That we should create. We have only JDBC template, named parameter template we don't have. So that compulsory we should create. So in case of update case also, where I should pass ID, right? I need to create map with ID, and this ID you should pass as a named parameter. For object and this ID again as a named parameter. For list, I don't have any input, so I can give null. Okay. Maybe give empty map output here. I don't need any arguments here. So if you compare these two, you can see the difference. While doing save method with the simple JDBC template, combining my SQL query with the data and executing it. Okay. Here in named parameter, I can compose the query with the named parameters, and these values I can pass here. These values I can pass here. So finally what it will return once it saves, primary key value it will return. Okay. So instead of directly merging, you might face issue here, right? If it is just integer, you need to put double quotes. If it is a string, single quotes with double quotes. You need not to worry about all the quotations here. Add your arguments here into the map, either it is a integer or string or date. You need not to worry, and you can give that input argument here. So in place of this ID, with this ID, whatever value is assigned, that value will be inserted here. Same way for this named parameter name, this is the value. And for email named parameter, this is the value. These values will be passed here during execution after this query. This query will be executed, and to that query, these are the input arguments it is passing. That is the simple difference between both. And this named parameter template is not created. So here you need to create one more bean, named parameter JDBC template. Create named parameter JDBC template. Named parameter JDBC template equal to new named parameter JDBC template. See, in this named parameter JDBC template, there is no default constructor. For JDBC template, they allowed default constructor and later set data source method added. But here, directly they are asking data source here to pass. You need to pass your data source during object creation itself. So it is mandatory dependency injection. Create a data source. You need to pass your data source here. Otherwise, even it will not create this object. Okay. So named parameter JDBC template dependency injection is mandatory. during this object creation itself, you should pass your data source. Whereas for JDBC template, it is not mandatory during object creation, but must you should call set data source method to pass your data source input. Okay, yeah, I think that's it. This one also will create a data source for you. Now test your named parameter template class. If I have data, I will do select all operation. Okay, for select all operation, no inputs, right? Let's do save operation. Named parameter JDBC template. Call save method and insert some data here. Let's insert one more record. Or your any number of records. I got success. So Nitin and Shekhar got inserted. Okay, as usual it will work. Two simple concepts to make your JDBC operations simple. Single line JDBC operations. Okay. So if you practice through these two, right, it is easy to deal with the JDBC. And JDBC kind of code you can write here. JDBC kind of code. On top of it, you may see how to call procedures, functions, in case if you are dealing with PLSQL code. Okay, you can do some R&D on it. But what is the benefit when I go with this? I can see here is instead of having multiple lines of code here, like open connection and create statement, again you need to execute statement, close a result set. Okay, if there is a result set, you need to open result set, close result set, close connection. As a developer, you should ensure your connections are opened, and closed properly or not. All that you need not to worry. You can relax, just assign this JDBC template to your team and ask them to work. You need not to worry about how connections people are using because that layer is encapsulated or abstracted. You need not to worry about it. Definitely JDBC template or named parameter JDBC template will do proper resource cleanup operations, and developer also straight away can focus on query and the results. That's it. You need not to bother about remaining operations. Same way, same way, Spring provided ORM support also. ORM support also. If you want to use plain Hibernate for your Spring based applications, you can use it. Okay, you can use it. Or else, if you want to use Spring ORM classes to make again this Hibernate simple, you can use Spring ORM, or on top of it, data API also we can see. Let's see with the plain Hibernate here. Okay, plain Hibernate with Spring, same example. Okay, how application architecture you need to visualize here is I got data to controller, controller to service, service to dog, and this dog is using Hibernate here for doing CRUD operations. Dog is using Hibernate for your CRUD operations. When user submits the data, usually we will get the data in the form of DTO here, student DTO. Let's say student data if you are inserting into student table. Whatever fields you need from the user, let's say ID, name, email you have. From front end if you are requesting or from front end user passing these values, we put this data into DTO, data transfer object. Okay, this data, whatever JSON data he sends, right? That JSON data, your controller will convert into DTO object, simple string, student bean object. Then this DTO we will send it to service class. If there are any business operations, it will handle. Else, this DTO data will be shifted to entity B, entity class. Okay, from this DTO object to entity object, we will convert data from one container to another container. Let's say this is a parcel I'm getting here. In this DTO, I'm getting data. I need to shift to this data from this to this. Once service shifting the data to entity, it will call your DAO methods. If there is a save method, it will call save by passing this entity, update by giving this entity, or delete by giving this entity. So using this entity, Hibernate can deal CRUD operations. As Hibernate is having multiple methods, okay, inside your DAO implementation, let's say DAO have save method with this entity. In Hibernate, we use session dot save method and the same entity we pass here. And straight away, this entity will save into your table. So this entity will pass to the save method, and the save method we call Hibernate session dot save method that will directly do the CRUD operation. Internally, the save method of Hibernate will generate SQL and it will add your data from entity. It will extract data from entity and it will finally execute it. But as a developer, you need not to worry about SQL and data operations. Hibernate will take care for you. Earlier, you returned all that set of code here by using JDBC or JDBC templates. As a developer, it's your duty to write your SQL queries and merging the data and all when you got the data from user. But here in Hibernate, you just put this data into entity bean and just give that entity bean to Hibernate method. It will take care of generating SQL operations and saving it on desired tables, required tables. Okay. So what we need to pass for this Hibernate means you need to you need to tell to this Hibernate when I pass this entity, it should understand this entity need to map to which table and which database you are using. So for that purpose, we create one mapping file and one configuration file. Via mapping file, it understands entity to table mapping file. Your entity to table mapping file, we call it as HBM file, Hibernate mapping file. You need to create one Hibernate mapping file and one configuration file. In this configuration, we maintain all our drivers information and connection pool size. Connection pool also you need not to create. Hibernate can create itself. Connection pool size, and which database you are using. Via dialect, we tell to Hibernate which database you are using. So this information we configure it under config class. They have their own configuration class, okay? So within this config file we configure. So Hibernate configuration class will load this. It will read these configurations and connects with this database. And when you pass this entity to understand on which table your entity should save, it reads your Hibernate mapping file. This also will link here. HBM file, yes. Yes, to your entity to table mapping you need to put here. So this is like a address book to Hibernate. When you give entity, right, it should know the destination table, your entity destination table, and in that table, entity will contain properties, right? Your bean will contain ID, name, email. So where that ID need to map into which column, name need to map to which column, email need to map to which column of your entity. Will understand from this HBM file. In HBM file, in very detail, we configure entity to table complete mapping here. So Hibernate understands that when you give entity via save methods, this save method internally having a logic that the save method internally having a logic that from HBM file it will read your table name and it will generate your SQL query. It have table name and column names here. So it is not a big deal to the save method. The save method generates SQL query and whatever data you have given as part of entity, it will pass that data with SQL and executes on a table. Okay. So not only simple CRUD operations, Hibernate is having so many benefits. Okay. As we discussed in last workshop, Hibernate is having so many advantages than the JDBC. So that's why for enterprise applications, people will use Hibernate rather than the JDBC. Okay. The first benefit is it will make your CRUD operation simple. Developer need not to have skills about SQL. Developer need not to have skills about SQL. As a Java developer, if we know how to use this library, that is enough. You need not to write any select queries or insert queries. Okay, little bit idea about SQL is sufficient to the developer. He can deal directly with the database via Hibernate. Okay, now let's do one example here. Spring with Hibernate. Add external jars. Yeah, the first link only, na? First link only in your Spring examples. This one. Hmm. Okay, you need to refer Maven. Okay, use Maven for your libraries. You don't get all these libraries together as a zip file. I collected and added them. You will not get them as a collection. You Google it. I got them from Maven only. Spring jar files for version 4, if I say. Download Spring Boot, yeah. jardownload.com, Java 2s. There is no such proprietary packages of repo Spring IO. Spring IO, usually we use this for Spring initialization. It is connecting to JFrog. We will check it, okay? If there is any release bundles. Yes, okay. I'm not sure. Yeah. So create here first Spring related code. I'm creating form dot rbu dot. Let's say if it is application package eform dot beans package. Okay, beans or entity. Here first start with your entity. Start with your entity here. Student entity. Student. Usually, in case of Hibernate XML based configurations, we use HBM file. If you don't want to use mapping file, directly we have annotations also here. Use at the rate table to map to your table name. Table name. Put this table name and your database schema name. And along with getters and setters. So if you have Lombok, you can use Lombok library at the rate data. No. If you have multiple schemas, I'm not sure. Remove it and try. Hmm. Because of this is the username, yeah. But in MySQL, the treatment is different. You need to give your schema here, your database name. Yeah. Maybe in Oracle this is not mandatory, but if it is MySQL, put the schema. Okay. Always better to have schema on here. Okay. My schema is different than password. I never tried it actually. You can try. So my entity bean class need to have setters and getters. I avoided that setters getters using at the rate data. And primary key field compulsory you should map with ID. Okay, ID if I think it is primary key, you need to map with ID. Compulsory your table should have a primary key. Okay, and the remaining columns need not to put anything. Okay, that's it. Your mapping is done. I want this table with column ID, name, email. So even it can create automatically table for you. If I delete this table here, okay, already we have data, drop table, table name, table is gone. Now while creating this table, right, Hibernate also automatically can create table. While creating table, this ID it will create as a primary key. Sorry, sorry, selected. Okay, it will show the list of tables. in the stable space or schema. Fine. So now just entity created. What else I need to create? For Hibernate, I need to create entity. So this entity class is created. Okay. So for this HBM file, as an alternative annotation I used to map to table. In entity itself, I have done that. And you need a configuration file. You need a configuration file to map this drivers, connection pool, and dialect information. Okay. So let's have one resources package and create here Hibernate configuration file. Let me copy that. Okay. Let me copy that. Switch workspace. Let's have your configuration file. I'm using Arkill here. So you may name it Hibernate configuration file, Hibernate cfg.xml. So you need to set your drivers properties here. If I'm using my Arkill, put Arkill properties here. If it is a MySQL, you can put MySQL properties. Shall we go with MySQL? Yeah, let's have MySQL here. Update. Okay, now we will check it in workbench. This table is there, right? Here also. What I will do, I'll drop this table. And which schema I'm using? Test schema. So put your schema name here. Okay. All MySQL configurations I have here. Username, password, dialect, HBM to DDL. Update means if there is no table, it will create table. If there is a table, if there are any schema updates, it will do. Schema update means if any new column if you introduce here later after so many days, client asked you to add address. If you add that address and restart your application, address column also will update it. Okay. And in place of mapping resources, mapping class. It will validate your table against your table against your entity. It will validate. It don't, yeah, it don't create any table. So it will creates. It will create. Update will useful if table not exist. If table not found, create new. If table exists, it won't do anything. If table exists, just it will check are there any alters required or not. Check if any alter required. You know, right? Already table is having, yeah. If it is a create, if it is a create, it will drop and create your table every time when you restart your machine. Update will not do that. And I don't recommend you people to use even create or update. Always go with validate. And it's our responsibility to create schema in SQL directly. Tables you create manually. Don't ask application to create them. Okay. Yeah. Sometimes it is creating damage to the application data. Developers accidentally they put create by copying some Google code they will put here. And when they start application, what is happening? This simple command, what it is doing, let's say your application is having 10 entities mapped to 10 tables, or 100 tables, 100 entities if you have here. It is dropping all that 100 existing tables from database schema and recreating new tables with complete new sizes and all. So the data will be lost, right? If you have already production data, some test data. So that's why I never recommend you to use. At least update. At least put update. It will not damage much. Okay, it will not drop existing table. At least. Okay. So the mapping class is configured. Fine. Now integration will be taken place. Integration will be taken place. Create configuration con dot rbu dot econ dot configuration package. Create your app config class here. App config. In earlier app config class, what I did, in earlier app config class, I created data source under JDBC template. Now here you need only one bean. Okay, what you need to create from this bean, public. You need to create a session factor, which is important for Hibernate CRUD operations. Okay, session factory. Here, your DAO, right? Your DAO, when it wants to do save operation or update delete, it needs a session like your connection. So in plain JDBC, data source is a connection pool. From this data source, we open connection to do CRUD operations. From data source, we call get connection. So it will give connection to us. Similarly, in Hibernate, data source will have what? All your connections, connection pool. Same way in Hibernate, your session factory will do this job. Session factory will do this job. All your connections are part of your session factory. Session factory will hold all your connections. And instead of using plain connection object here, instead of using a connection object directly via session factory, what we will get? We will get a session. We will get one session object. Session is equal to session factory dot we call open session. When you call open session method, it will provide you one session. In JDBC, connection is important for you to do CRUD operations. Using connection, you will be creating statement and blah blah. Whereas in Hibernate, you need session. Using this session, directly you can pass entity. It will take care of your CRUD operations. Okay. Remember that session factory is like your data source. Session factory is like your data source. So I am creating my session factory here. Create a session factory. Here that integration code will take in place. How you will create session factory. So here I am again starting my Hibernate container. You need to start your Hibernate container. Hibernate container will create session factory. Annotation configuration. This is Hibernate container class for annotation based configurations. See here what you can do, cfg.configure. Load your file here. Resources slash hibernate.cfg.xml file. So in this step what it will do, it is loading your configuration file. What we have here configurations, driver configurations, connection pool sizes, and which database you are using, and do you want to create tables or not. Internally, it generates SQLs, right? As I said, so all that SQLs you can see. Internally generated SQL queries you can able to see if you configure show SQL to true. And your mapping class. Usually we will be having hundreds of mapping classes. You can place all that classes here. Okay. Now here all these properties are for what? Session factory only. Okay. Session factory for your session factory only. All this stuff. Now once after you loading it, CFG dot, when you call build a session factory, it builds a session factory for you. It builds a session factory for you. It builds a session factory for you. CFG dot session factory. Then return this session factory. That's it. Your annotation configuration class is a Hibernate container. This is like Hibernate IOC container, not ours. Hibernate container. This is for Hibernate. This is your Hibernate container, like your IOC. Hibernate container. So this Hibernate container reading Hibernate configuration file, and it will build your session factory object, which is like a data source. Session factory is like data source, or you may call connection pool. Like connection pool, it holds sessions in place of connections. Again, session inbuilt it is having connection only. Otherwise, how it will deal database operations. Okay, that's it. My configuration setup also done. Now, where I can use this session factory? Use in your DAOs. Write a DAO here, like your JDBC have open. Write your DAO here. Student DAO. So what I need to automate here? Earlier JDBC template I created under configuration class, but now what I created? Session factory created. So you need to auto wire your session factory here. Auto wire your session factory here. Okay, using session factory, can I do CRUD operations? Of course you can. Tell me what is your doubt? Uh, Mapping class. This is this is complete. This is complete database connection properties. And your mapping file, instead of file, I have a class here. Annotated based class I use. So that I configured here. While creating session factory, how it will create these tables or update tables? Configuration file linked with your mapping file. Here configuration files mapping files we link to configuration. Configuration file we load it into Hibernate. Okay. So whereas mapping file I don't have, directly mappings I have inside bean only. So bean itself I given here because sorry, if it is a file, yeah, file path you need to pass. Mapping file, the argument is mapping file, XML file we map here. If it is an annotated class, use class here. Okay, that is the only difference. Usually we use annotations only nowadays, so that's why I took this example. So you have session factory, then how to do same operations here? Just keep this code and observe what we do here. ID, name, email I am getting here. Just this properties you need to save it into student object. Student. This is your entity class. New student. So set all your properties into the student. Set ID. Whatever user input is given. Pass it into it. Set name. Pass name. Set email. Pass email. Okay, now I have student entity. Okay, this data populated into entity. Then how to do save operation? You have session factory here, right? Use session factory dot open session. Open session. Open session will provide you one session object. It will provide you a session object, Hibernate session. Now use this Hibernate session dot save, pass your object here, and you need to commit your transaction, session dot begin transaction dot commit. Yeah, it will auto commit. It can auto commit, but time being see how we are doing. Session dot close. Finally, we close it. So this much code we need to write. If it is a plain Hibernate, if it is a plain Hibernate, we have to get a session. Then we need to begin transaction, save your data, commit transaction, and close the session. Closing session means returning back your connection to connection port. Like how when you call connection dot close, your connections will go back to data source, right? Here after using this connection, what you need to do end of the day, you need to call connection dot close. So carefully your connection will be placed it back into connection pool. Similar way, once you're done with your session, when you call session dot close, right, this session will be released for next user. Okay, by default, Hibernate will work with the connection pool only. Whereas in JDBC, we can write plain operation also. Same thing you can apply for update, delete, and all. Hmm. Sorry, if JVM. Hmm. Hmm. Okay, I will check and let you know. Okay. No, no, not related to JVM. No, even I'm not sure. I should check that. Okay. You call update method here. Simple. For update, pass your entity and call update only. Bus. Your update is done. You want to delete? Same thing. Set your ID into student object. Open your session. Call delete. That's it. And you want to select? Everything is simple here. Do you want to select? Select also simple. This much logic not at all required. Row map are not required. All that bullshit not required here. You can simply call get method. And what is your id, sorry, pass this id, and into which bean you want to get it, student. That's it. Yes, of course, but this is called simple local transaction only. For this current, this is for current db operation only. Current select, okay, for select transactions not ever required, only for dml it is required, only for that particular current operation only. Okay, by default when you set auto commit true, even you need not to worry about this local transaction begin and commit also. When it is by default auto commit true. Okay, if auto commit is true, then this also not required. Maybe you remove it and see. By default, I believe auto commit is true for Hibernate. We'll see that. Okay. Get your student object. Yeah. Hmm. SQL queries. Hmm. No, you can use HQL in that case. If you have only special requirements, special queries if you want to run, okay, rather than dealing with the direct object, you can pass HQL queries here. Hibernate queries you can use. Now see this much big select and all we returned. Here in Hibernate, you use session dot create criteria for student class. I hope we saw HQL query also, right, on that session. So create criteria, it will give criteria object. Now from this criteria dot for list, it give you all list of student objects. So where is my JDBC code? Everything is void here. I am not writing here. Everything is taken care by your Hibernate. What you should do here, just you should know how to do the save operation or update operation. Nothing much, right? Logically, if you see simple session dot save, that is done your save operation. Session dot update, update operation. Session dot delete, delete operation. Session dot get single record select operation. Session dot create criteria. Then calling criteria dot list, giving list of student objects. Bus. No SQL involved here. But internally Hibernate will do that for you. Okay. Now let's have a client class. Client class. First. Ah, yeah. Our Spring XML. So Spring XML file only will scan this configuration, right? It will execute this bean. Then session factor will be created. Then your DO object also will be created same way. Under this DO object, session factory also will be automatic. That is all doing by your Hibernate. Oh, sorry, Spring. So when I load this into Spring, first step what it will do, it will read your Spring XML file when I run the client class. From this it will read your package, then it will go to each and every package here and it will see are there any stereotyped classes. Yes, first it will do the execution of configuration class. So it will go to configuration class, it will try to execute this bean. So here you started Hibernate container. So it will start Hibernate container and Hibernate container reading Hibernate configuration file. So it will go to Hibernate configuration file. Hibernate configuration will do get all these connection properties and entity information and it creates Hibernate session factory. and that session factory will be registered into Spring IOC. Now Spring IOC will do what? It will create one more, it will go to DAO, it will create DAO object. Whatever session factory was registered, that will auto-write here. That's it. Its job is done. Now when user request for some bean here, correct, correct. Yes, DAO service controller, back to front. Okay. So before DAO, this Hibernate session factory will be created, right? Let me read it. Consider data you are getting to controller, service, DAO. DAO needs to do CRUD operations here. Before that, configuration should execute to create your session factory. So for this configuration, you need a session factory bean. For this session factory bean, you need entity classes and configuration files. Okay. So you have your entity and configuration file here. These two are for what? To create your session factory. How do you create session factory? Using configuration class. Using at the rate bean, you can do this. This entity configured in config file, and this config file is loading under configuration class, annotation configuration class inside at the rate bean method. Where this at the rate bean method we are putting under configuration class. Correct. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Entity is your bean which is mapped to table. Okay. So how this entity you created using your table only you created it. Table structure you mentioned it. Here. If your table is having ID, name, email, then you put that same properties here with the annotations. Yeah. 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 So session factory is aware of your entity because via configuration it is loaded. So when somebody try to save this entity via DAO using session factory sessions, they know that about this entity because this entity belongs to them only. So they know where it should go and where it should save or update or delete. So configuration class when you start IOC container, right? When you start IOC container, IOC Spring XML file, in Spring XML file when we put component scan here. So it knows about your controller path, service path, DAO path, and configuration. So first what it will do as a first step, it will call configuration when you start your IOC. When you load this it into IOC container and when you start your IOC, IOC will do what? Immediately it will read your XML, and if you put here component scan of your packages. So here we pass our package name, main root package we passed here. So up to that is sufficient. So when you pass your root package name, it will scan all the child packages of this root. Under that root, if it find configuration, so first it will execute configuration. So step 1. Under this configuration, it will execute your beans. So under this bean, it is creating session factory. So how many objects are readily available now in this step 1? One configuration object and second your session factory object. These both are registered. Where they registered in IOC. Now IOC is having your session factory object and configuration object. Good. Then IOC will do what? Step 2. It will create your repository object. Step 2. It will create your repository object. Along with creating this object, if you mentioned auto wired of a session factory, if you auto wire here, what it will do? Already this object is available with IOC. It will auto wire that object here, whatever object it is created, right? This object will be auto wired for you here. Then immediately, next it will create your service object. Then it can auto wire your DAO here. It will create controller object. It will auto wire your service here. That's it. This is how the flow will execute. Okay. Now I am getting my DAO object. Yeah. Hmm. Correct. Configuration class. Configuration class. Always first step configuration. Hmm. 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 Of course. So you need not to bother about that ordering here. Always remember this configurations will be created. Obviously all controllers having service dependencies only. Controller never invoke repository, correct? In a generic, if you remember, controllers having default, by default service dependencies only. Service will have repository dependencies only. Okay. So after configuration, obviously it will go to repository, then service, then controller. Okay. As you said, yes, let it registered it. Controller A is having controller service A dependency. Okay. Service A is having service A is having A repository dependency. So as in this chain, the last entity is repository. So it will start creating object from last. First the repository, then service, then controller. Same thing, right? For every use case, it will create repository, service, controller only. But before all that, configurations will be executed first. The reason is configurations are having all the integrations code. If integration code fails, it's need not to, it is not important to start your application here. No sense, right? Starting repository services controllers, because all these integration beans are very important. They need to execute first. So always it will give priority to configuration to execute first. Then your classes. Now let's run it. I hope it showed inside. MySQL driver, we removed it intentionally. Let's add it. VS వాడుతున్నారు. VS వాడడం వల్ల జనరల్‌గా విజువల్ కోడ్ స్టూడియో రైట్? వై సో? Yeah, but that is not designed for Spring. For Spring, you use Spring Toolsuit. STS or better go with IntelliJ. Yes, we can use VS Code also. See, literally, I'm not habituated with IntelliJ. For my current application, all developers are using IntelliJ. Especially, I got permission to get Eclipse and work. I have good hands on Eclipse commands and all. So, uh, see, main importantly, we use two commands: Control H. During development, if you want to see something, I have lot of files. If I have lot of files and if I want to search something from file, I'll use Control H. Usually, Control H for searching. Okay, this is one important command. Control Shift R we will use to find the classes. Let's say you know the class name, but you don't know from which package it is. So we use Control Shift R. Let's say if I put add config here, it will show you. It is saying, sir, in this code, in this example, you have this class. Which one you want to open? So directly I can go to that class. Like this simple commands we have, and Control K to search the references. Three, four commands usually I use. Okay, we are deviating. I will. Okay, what error we got? MySQL error, right? Yeah, I added that. Run it. Oh. SQL state 1000 in unknown initial character set index to if I received from client character encoding property. Same issue when I saw what I did. Something character encoding we configured. No, no, actually it is the database issue. The database MySQL 8 I installed. So for MySQL 8 character encoding extra property I need to add here in URL. Here extra encoding properties we need to put encoding disable or enable something. Uh, Let me see. If it doesn't work, we will go with the Oracle only. Okay. Let me. Yeah. So something like this. Reconnect true use SSL false. All this stuff. If I put here, auto reconnect. Do you want semicolon? Use SSL must end with the delimiter. MySQL non-transient could not create connection to database server. Attention, give up. Cause SSL issue. I'm done with MySQL. Let me see Oracle driver here. Oracle dot jdbc dot Oracle driver. Here is called Oracle colon. The local host 1521 XE schema. Yeah. That is user. In Oracle, that is what I'm saying. That is user. That is user. In MySQL, we use it as a database. మీకు ఈ స్కీమాలో ఎన్ని నెంబర్ ఆఫ్ యూజర్స్ అన్నా ఉండొచ్చు. ఆ స్కీమా వచ్చేసి యూజర్. యూజర్ స్పెసిఫిక్ క్రెడెన్షియల్స్ ఉంటాయి కదా మీకు మీ యూజర్. ఆర్ విత్ ఇన్ ది స్కీమా యూ మే హ్యావ్ మల్టిపుల్ schemas again. I'm not sure how to say schemas. But all these belongs to same schema, right? Whichever I have. But I logged into XC schema only. Okay. See, within the same XC, it is showing some other schemas also. Sysax, system. System is a schema within XE, XE schema. Maybe child schemas like that you can consider. Or dialect. So, Oracle driver, URL, username, password. Yeah. Okay. Let me see. unknown entity student, com.argue.ecom.entity student. Unknown entity. Is package name is wrong. com.argue.ecom.entity dot student. Acha, acha, acha. See, one more important annotation is at the rate entity along with table. At the rate entity also you have to put. So one query generated, insert into student Spring Boot microservices, email, name, ID, and values. But before this table, it should have done some create operation also. Na? So if you see here, running HVM to DDL schema update. So it is updating schema here. And in this info, it is saying table not found. So as table not found, it created a new table. As this table not found, it created a new table. Schema update completed. Means your table is created. Then it is inserted your data. So Hibernate created table for you. Then it started inserting. Earlier this table was not there. Now this table is created. And data also got inserted. Record the errors got inserted. And if you see describe student, it will show your table structure, how it is created. Take a member data type for ID and only up to 10 precisions taken and make it as a primary key. Taken varchar 255 length for name 255 length. So it is created table by default. In that table this data got inserted. Okay. In case if you add new property here, one more new property address. This address I added, and if I try to insert one more record here to, okay, client given requirement to you add one more field, address field also. So I did added address. So take one more field here and import string address and set this address into student dot set address. That's it. Now pass here address value also and run this. Fetching database metadata updating schema, and now it is showing table found. It is saying I got the table and columns name, ID, email I got. Okay, cool. Now one more field we have given, right, address field. That schema updated here. Now during insertion, if you see, it is inserting address also from this user onwards. So internally your schema got updated. Address field is added, and for the first user null value got inserted, and from the next user onwards, whoever is using address, for them address also will insert. Always the new columns which you are adding, right, in your requirement, if client says add one more field to the table, you can say okay when, if that field is not, I mean, if this field is null allowed field only, you can allow. If they say address should not null, so for the existing records, it cannot compromise, right? So you can't able to alter that new columns. If it is a not null column, you can't able to alter it because table might have the data. For that data, address, if it is a not null column, The data will not compromise. That so and so column will ask to insert the mandatory address, so it cannot update your address column. Alter. This is nullable column. Okay. Did I mention anywhere not null? In schema, we can mention not null, right? While creating tables, not null fields. Can we have not null fields? Yeah, constraints. So I'm saying address constraint, not null constraint. If you apply here, if it is a not null column, if you want to mention not null constraint for this non null or for this column, maybe I'm believing here nullable false. Means if you say this is not null column, then it will not encourage. It will say already you inserted Dheeraj record. When I try to alter this column, that Dheeraj record will not allow me to alter this column. Because you are saying nullable false, what I should insert for Dheeraj? You are asking me to add a new column. Already record ఉంది కదా. If there is a record, how it will allow you to create this new column there? You are saying nullable, but for the existing records, what it need to pass here? That's why it won't allow. Okay. So don't scratch your heads if it is not allowing nullable columns, or definitely it will not allow. In that case, what you can do? In that case, what you can do? Take this record backup, already existing table data backup. You can take into new table and truncate this table. Okay, truncate this table data. Then you can apply not null columns. So your column will be altered, then that backup data again insert back into this table with the default address. Default address by saying none something or null something you put and insert here. Okay, just a tip for you. Okay, yeah. So this is how we can use simple Hibernate. This is how we can use simple Hibernate here. Tomorrow I'll show you Spring War. Okay, so instead of having this Hibernate configuration extra files, right, we can avoid them. Spring given some integration classes, so using that integration classes you can avoid them, and this lot of lengthy code we written here, right? So this opening session transaction, this complete stuff we can remove and we can execute like JDBC templates, single line save operation, update, delete operations we can do. Tomorrow I'll show you that Hibernate template concept with the ORM integrations. Plain Hibernate directly. Hibernate framework, Spring framework together working now. Integration taken place here. Yeah, plain JDBC we saw. Then we promoted to JDBC template, named the parameter JDBC template. Now one step, you know, ahead we came to Hibernate, plain Hibernate. Then if we go to the next step, there we will see Hibernate integration layer with the Spring given libraries. Here I didn't use any Spring library. Directly we created session factory. Now we will see Spring given library also. That will avoid your configuration file and that will avoid session factory also. Again they made it simple. Correct. Okay. Yeah. So tomorrow we will be finishing with the Hibernate concept. Then we will look it into transactions. Okay. We will discuss a little depth about the transactions. Then we will see AOP. Then we can shift to MVC. Okay. So by the time we reach to MVC concept, MVC are for controllers. Okay. We will be aware how to write services with the transactions and AOP, and we are confident about repositories, how to write CRUD operations. So we can able to do end-to-end application by the time. Okay. Yeah.